Hi, this is Andre. I want to talk about the delay interface mode on the Echoplex Digital Pro. Thank you very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this. I can talk a lot about the delay interface mode and what it represents in a historical and technical sense, and I probably will do that. But before I bore you to tears with my endless philosophizing, I'm going to do some demonstrating. The interface modes are accessed on the bottom parameter row under the record column. By default, if you don't have anything plugged in to the feedback input jack on the back panel, then there are 4 interface modes: loop, delay, expert, and stutter. I recently did a video introducing the concept of interface modes, so you can refer there for more information. What we're going to be looking at in this video is the second interface mode, which is called delay mode. So before I go into my big soliloquy, let me do some demonstrating. I'm going to record a loop. I haven't played anything yet. Please notice that Overdub is not open. Here's why I want you to notice that. I'm going to play something, and it's overdubbing. And you can also hear that it's decaying. So the reason it's overdubbing is because part of what the delay interface mode does is have all incoming sound added to the loop by default as its default state. The reason it's decaying is because feedback is down a little bit. I have it set right now to 103. Let's leave it at about there. Let's set it to 106. I'm going to play around a little more. And again, this is the delay interface mode at work. I like that. So now I'm going to press overdub. Ordinarily, if we were using a regular interface mode, if we were using the loop interface mode, pressing overdub would mean that we would start to add new layers into the loop. Now, by pressing overdub in the delay interface mode, 2 things have happened. The first is, you might have noticed, we're not decaying anymore. When you're in the delay interface mode, pressing overdub freezes feedback at 100%. The second thing that happens is that it doesn't pass the input signal into the loop. So I can play over the top of this. And nothing's getting added in. Now let's say I want to evolve things. So I'm pressing overdub. Now things are being added into the loop, and you can hear that it's decaying a little more. Let's say I still want to add things into the loop, but I don't want it to decay, so I'm turning feedback up to 127. Now let's say that I like that. Well, it needs something else. Let's give it a nice old drone. There we go. There's a nice drone. So now let's say I want to play over the top of that, but I don't want to add anything more to the loop. So pressing overdub blocks the input signal. If feedback had been set to less than 127, this would lock it at maximum repeat. So I'm going to go out of overdub, I'm going to bring feedback down slightly, just a little bit. You'll hear it'll start decaying a little bit. But now if I press overdub again, that's going to lock feedback at 127, 100%, and I can play over the top of it without adding anything new into the loop. Now I'm going to press overdub again. Now things are being added to the loop and feedback is active. like that. So I'm going to press overdub again and do a little more gratuitous noodling. Thank you for your patience. Now we are adding new stuff into the loop. Overdub. Feedback is a little less than 100% because that's where I have it set with the feedback knob. If I tweak it down a little bit, now it's at 113 out of 127, which is close to 100%, but low enough that you do get a gradual decay. And overdub. It sounds very counterintuitive to say this out loud, but overdub is not lit up, which means that we are adding content into the loop. That's a crazy thing to hear myself say, but it's true. So that's the delay interface mode in its most basic sense. Now, some of the interface modes do not appear in the menu unless you have a pedal plugged into the feedback input jack on the back panel of the Echoplex. What's interesting about delay is that it does appear if you don't have a pedal plugged into the feedback jack. But if you do plug a pedal into the feedback jack, you get extra functionality within this interface mode that you don't have if there isn't a pedal. So let me plug a pedal into the input jack. See if I can do this without embarrassing myself too terribly much. Here is the volume pedal. Sorry for the messy MIDI cable. All right, so what happens when you add a pedal into the equation is that the pedal regulates the input level of the live signal, in my case the guitar. That regulates how much of that signal is being added to the loop. But it doesn't kill the live input signal. What does that mean? This is one of those things that makes a lot more sense to just demonstrate than to talk about. So I'm going to play a regular note. We're still in delay interface mode. There we go. I'm going to turn feedback up to 100%. I'm going to add another couple of notes in regularly. All right. So now what I'm going to do is play some notes. I'm going to start with the pedal all the way back. You're not going to see a display change on the front panel here, but you're going to hear it. So I'm going to play a note. After I play the note, I'm going to push the pedal forward, and let's check out what happens. Do that a few more times. Bring feedback down a little bit. Bring the feedback back up. And just as an aside, if you look at that LED right there, that will show you when the live input instrument is being played. So if, as you're watching the video, you're a little confused as to where the sound is coming from, as to how much is coming from my guitar and how much is coming from the EDP, if the input LED there lights up, then that means it's coming from the guitar. I'm playing it live. Any sound that's happening when that is not lit up, like the feedback LED, is coming strictly from the Echoplex. So again, what's happening now that we're in the delay interface mode and we have a pedal plugged in is that with the pedal all the way forward, it will add notes the way it normally does. If you bring it back all the way, it won't add anything in. And if you bring the pedal forward, it will gradually increase the level of the input, which means that if you bring it forward after striking a note, you get a fade-in effect. If I bring it down about halfway, you should still hear an overdub, but the overdub will be a lot quieter than the live input. Let's find out. Still kind of loud, bring it back more. Yeah, you can hear that was a lot quieter. Yeah. So now if I bring the pedal all the way forward, and if I start a note, I'm going to bring feedback down because that's getting a little dense. I know how it feels. Haha. All right. So here again, starting notes with the pedal all the way back in the heel down position. You can fade notes in. You could also do the opposite. You could start the note with the pedal all the way forward and then bring it back to get a very staccato effect. So you can hear that the notes, even though I'm holding the notes longer, they're getting cut off on the input to the EDP. I've never tried that before. It's a cool sound. I like that. Oh, that's nice. Learn something new every day. Bring feedback back up to 100%. Build something up. Let's change the mode because this is getting a little Dorian. Well, it's me, of course, it's Dorian. There it is. Trying to find that harmonic. There we go. Embarrassing search was not added in, just the tail of the note once I actually found it. So now, here again. I'm going to press overdub so that I can noodle gratuitously. And when overdub is on, that blocks the input signal from being entered into the loop. So even if I have the pedal all the way forward, even with the pedal all the way forward, it doesn't get added into the loop. Now I'm gonna take us out of infinite mode. I'm going to bring the feedback a little lower and try and wrap this up in some kind of moderately tasteful way. I still have feedback down, but because the pedal is all the way down, I can noodle over the top. And it doesn't get added into the loop, so you can keep decaying like that. All right. Okay, so now that we've played around with delay interface mode on the EDP, let's look a little bit at the historical lineage, why it functions the way it does, and where that comes from. Before you had dedicated hardware looping devices like the Echoplex Digital Pro or the Lexicon Jamman or the original Boomerang, these things appeared in the early 90s. And before that, you didn't really have any such thing as a dedicated hardware looping device. You had people doing live looping in various forms all the way back to the 1960s, but they weren't using dedicated hardware loopers because that category didn't exist. There were no such thing as dedicated hardware live loopers at that time. So you had people using delay units, analog and digital echoes, reel-to-reel tape decks, and basically using and abusing and modifying other tools in order to get them to do the kinds of things they wanted to do. One of the units that people would use in a modified capacity was a unit called the Lexicon PCM 42, which was originally developed by a gentleman named Gary Hall, and Gary was also responsible for doing a lot of modifications on the PCM 42. And among other things, those modifications were designed to expand its functionality as a live looper. And the PCM 42, amongst many other things, had a function where you could freeze the delay or the unit in its current state and play over the top without adding your live input into the delay. So it would basically take the loop wherever it was set with however much feedback it had. It would freeze the loop at that point, and it would block any live input signal from being added into the loop. So I would say that the delay interface mode is basically a tip of the hat and a direct inspiration and a direct nod back to the Lexicon PCM 42. I don't know a lot about looping history, so I don't want to sit here and embarrass myself and you by pretending like I know about it, but I do know that before we had the Echoplex Digital Pro, Matthias Grob invented the Paradis Loop Delay. The Paradis Loop Delay ended up becoming the Echoplex Digital Pro when it was licensed to Gibson. What's not so widely known, and I had to double check on this doing a little bit of homework before filming this video, is that before the Paradis Loop Delay, Matthias Grob was actually doing stuff on a Lexicon PCM 42, and I believe it was actually Gary Hall's actual PCM 42 that Matthias was using. And he used that modified PCM 42, I think, for a couple of years before he actually had a working Paradis Loop Delay prototype that he could use. So in a very real, very literal sense, the Echoplex Digital Pro is a direct descendant of the PCM 42. There's a lot that the PCM 42 does other than what I just demonstrated on this video. It has a lot of capabilities beyond what is duplicated here. So I'm not going to say that using the loop delay interface mode is the same as using a PCM 42, but it's definitely, I would say, coming from that lineage. It's definitely directly inspired by the way that people would loop using something like the PCM 42 in the days before you had dedicated hardware live loopers. So for me, as a musician, as a teacher, as a conceptualist, as a guy who spends too much time thinking about this stuff, I'm a big fan of working within parameters and setting limitations for oneself. I absolutely believe that this is a big part of creativity for a great many musicians. A lot of the time when you see people doing the most interesting and most innovative things with music, it's very often a case of they're having to work within limitations, and in some cases try and push beyond those limitations in whatever capacity they can. I would say that learning an instrument is about working within a set of limitations. I've taught guitar, mainly beginning guitar, for about 14 years. And after seeing, I don't know how many hundreds of students come through the door, I would say that in a lot of ways, learning to play an instrument is about learning to understand and work within and overcome the limitations of that particular instrument. So I love the idea that you have an interface mode here in the EDP that allows you to access the type of approach that people were using before there was such a thing as a hardware live looping device. And again, I'm not saying that the interface mode by itself is an exact emulation of the Lexicon PCM 42 or any other device. A lot of those older units had all kinds of functionality beyond what the EDP does. The EDP can do a lot of things those old units can't, but a lot of those old units also did plenty of things that the EDP cannot. So I'm not saying, yeah, man, use the delay interface mode in the Echoplex Digital Pro. It's just like using a PCM 42. It's not just like a PCM 42, but I would say the basic functionality comes directly from that lineage. And I would say that a lot of live looping musicians, myself very much included, are really not great about learning our history. And I am completely guilty of that very, very much. I have a lot of work to do to really bring myself up to speed with the canon and some of the definitive units that were used, some of the definitive recordings and performances. So this is something that I very much need to work on as well. And I would say that this kind of thing, interface modes like the loop delay mode, are a great way of changing the way that we think about this stuff, especially for somebody like myself who's been, I mean, I got my Echoplex in 1995. It's now 2018. And I don't mean that in a braggy way. Just using it for as long as I've used it means that I have certain cliches and conventions and bags of tricks that I dip into just without thinking about it. So I really like shaking that up. I really like forcing myself to examine stuff in different ways. And to me, the delay interface mode on the Echoplex Digital Pro is a great way of doing that. So a big thank you to Gary Hall and Lexicon for the PCM 42, and a huge thank you to Matthias Grob for modifying one of Gary's PCM 42s in such a way that that ended up leading to him developing the Paradis Loop Delay, which ended up to developing the Echoplex Digital Pro. Live looping is not an area that is particularly known for its historical knowledge, but it would be nice to change that. And I'm not knowledgeable enough to really be able to affect any substantial change about that on my own, but I'm working on filling in the gaps in my own knowledge. So that's one of the interface modes in the Echoplex Digital Pro. You may find it really inspiring to work with. You may work with it a little bit and find that it doesn't do anything for you. And that's fine. That's a completely valid reaction to take. I'm not saying that you have to go and use this interface mode. I'm saying that using this interface mode, having this interface mode available to you, is going to give you a big insight into where this stuff came from, where it has come from, and different ways of working. So with all that in mind, thank you so much, as always, for tuning in. Thank you very much to Mark Oswald for commissioning this one. Thank you to Gary Hall and Matthias Grob and Kim Flint and Andy Butler and Chris Muir and so many other people I'm forgetting to mention for making all this amazing stuff possible. I am still catching up with the stuff that these guys were working on decades ago. And it's very humbling to be studying their work and realize how much work we still have to do in comparison to those guys. But I'm doing what I can. Thank you as always. I will talk to you guys soon. Bye-bye.